You stole those shoes, right?
No, sir, I didn't steal anything. I bought them. I got the receipt right here.
Those cost over $5 grand. There's no way someone like you saved up.
Yeah, right. Kids
No
your age
chance.
dress
You're
like
under
this.
arrest.
The officer's voice cut through the boutique like something that had already decided the outcome. He looked at the shopping bag in Carlos Edwards' hands. He looked at Carlos. He did not look at the receipt. Those sneakers cost $6,000. There was no way someone like him had saved for that. There was no way his parents had helped him. There was no scenario, in the officer's mind or in Stephanie Reed's, where an 18-year-old black teenager could walk out of a store like this having paid for what he was carrying. So Officer Austin Parker reached for his handcuffs. And Stephanie Reed watched from 3 feet away, arms folded, expression settled into the quiet satisfaction of someone who believed they had done the right thing. What neither of them knew, what they were about to find out, was that the store employee who had processed the transaction 20 minutes earlier was still inside. That the security cameras had captured everything. That the name of the man who owned that boutique was Malik Coleman. And that the moment Travis Morgan walked through those glass doors and said that name out loud, everything Austin Parker thought he controlled was already gone. But before the lawsuit that would cost Stephanie Reed $500,000 and end Austin Parker's career in law enforcement was set in motion, there was a teenager standing in handcuffs for buying what he had earned. Before we continue, drop in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? We love knowing where our audience is. And if you believe a black teenager should be able to walk out of a store with a legal purchase without being put in handcuffs, hit like and subscribe. Let's get into it. Carlos Edwards had been inside Prestige Soul Boutique for less than 30 minutes when the sirens arrived. He was still near the display mirrors, the pristine white box tucked under his arm, the kind of box that only came out from behind the counter when someone had called ahead, confirmed availability, and shown up prepared to pay. The sneakers inside had taken 8 months to become real. 8 months of closing shifts at a grocery warehouse, of setting aside percentages from paychecks that most teenagers would have spent the same week they arrived, of maintaining a 3.3 GPA through a senior year that asked more of him than most adults would have managed. His parents had watched all of it. They had kept their side of the arrangement. The morning of his 18th birthday, they had deposited the balance he could not cover on his own, and Carlos had walked into Prestige Soul that afternoon with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from having actually done what you said you would. Travis Morgan, the store's senior floor associate, had been working the boutique for 4 years. He had processed the transaction himself, confirmed the model, confirmed the size, ran the payment through in 2 parts, printed the receipt, placed the box in the branded bag, and handed it across the counter. The whole exchange had taken 11 minutes. Carlos had sent a photo to his mother before he even reached the door. He had been standing near the mirrors, taking a final look at the bag in his hands, when Stephanie Reed walked in. She had come into Prestige Soul 40 minutes earlier, scanned the floor display, and located the exact pair she wanted for her son. Then she had seen the price and left. The amount was more than she had available. She had not called ahead. She had not saved. She had simply wanted, and been unable, and that particular combination had left her sitting with a frustration she had not yet found somewhere to put. When she saw Carlos near the mirrors, young, black, in plain clothes, holding a bag from a store she had just been priced out of, she found somewhere to put it. She did not ask questions. She did not consider the receipt visible through the bag's open top, or the transaction sticker on the box, or the fact that the floor associate was standing 20 feet away and had not reacted with concern. She considered only what she saw, filtered through what she had already decided, and she stepped away from Carlos by a few feet and called 911. She told the dispatcher there was a young man outside who had walked out with stolen merchandise. She said the sneakers cost $6,000. She said there was no way he could have bought them. The call was logged. The nearest unit was dispatched. Officer Austin Parker arrived in under 4 minutes. He entered the boutique the way officers enter spaces when they have already formed a conclusion, directly, without hesitation, his eyes finding Carlos before the door had finished closing behind him. The other customers registered his presence. The boutique grew quiet in the particular way enclosed spaces go quiet when authority arrives without invitation. Parker moved toward Carlos without scanning the room. He did not look at the staff. He did not look at Stephanie Reed, who had positioned herself nearby with her arms crossed and her expression fixed into the certainty of someone waiting to be confirmed. He stopped in front of Carlos and stated, not asked, that he needed to explain where the sneakers had come from. Carlos' posture had changed the moment the sirens reached him through the glass. He had straightened, then stilled, his earlier ease replaced by the particular kind of alertness that 18 years of experience had taught him to carry in exactly these situations. He tried to answer. He reached toward the bag for the receipt. He began to explain the 8 months, the grades, the arrangement with his parents, the transaction that had been completed in this same room less than a half hour ago. Parker cut him off each time. Stephanie Reed, from her position nearby, added her voice to the silence around Carlos. She referenced the price of the sneakers. She referenced his clothes. She said, without evidence and without hesitation, that situations like this had a way of resolving themselves, a phrase that required no interpretation. Parker did not question her. He did not ask Travis Morgan, who was still on the floor, whether a transaction had taken place. He did not ask to see the receipt. He turned back to Carlos, told him to turn around, and the sound of handcuffs, the specific, metallic sound that a boutique like Prestige Soul was never meant to contain, settled over the room. Phones came out. Whispers moved through the customers in clusters. The staff, caught between protocol and what they were watching, stayed still. The receipt was visible in the bag, which had fallen slightly to the side. No one moved toward it. Carlos was being walked toward the front of the store, past the display cases, past the mirrors where he had been standing 30 minutes earlier with a completely different expression on his face, when Travis Morgan stepped forward. He did not raise his voice. He did not move dramatically. He simply placed himself in the path of the exit and asked Officer Parker to stop. Parker told him to move. Travis did not move. He said, calmly and with the confidence of someone who had processed the transaction himself and still had the timestamp on the register, that there may have been a misunderstanding, that there was a standard verification procedure the store used in exactly these situations, that it would take less than 2 minutes. Parker's expression tightened. Stephanie Reed's arms shifted. The boutique, which had been holding a collective breath, held it a little tighter. Travis walked to the register without waiting for permission. He pulled up the transaction log. The timestamp appeared on screen. The amount. The payment method. The item code matching the box currently tucked under Carlos Edwards' arm. He turned the screen so that anyone standing in the front half of the store could see it. The silence that followed was not the silence of confusion. It was the silence of a room that had just watched one version of events collapse. Parker's grip on Carlos' arm did not release, but something in his posture shifted, a slight recalibration, the physical equivalent of a person who has just realized they are standing in the wrong place. Stephanie Reed uncrossed her arms. The certainty in her face flickered. Carlos remained in handcuffs. His innocence was on the screen. It had not yet reached his wrists. Travis Morgan looked at Parker. His voice came out level and measured, each word placed with deliberate weight. He said the store was owned by Malik Coleman. A staff member near the back of the boutique looked up. Another glance toward the door. Parker's eyes moved, just slightly, just enough, in a way that had nothing to do with the transaction log on the screen and everything to do with the name he had just heard. The moment had shifted. The power in the room had not yet redistributed itself fully, but it had begun to move. And Carlos Edwards, still in handcuffs, still standing in the store where he had legally bought what he had worked 8 months to afford, understood that whatever was coming next was no longer just about him. The handcuffs came off without ceremony. Officer Austin Parker produced the key, worked the mechanism, and stepped back, and the metallic release that followed settled into the boutique the way a verdict settles into a courtroom, carrying more weight than its sound suggested. Carlos brought his arms forward slowly. The marks were already visible on his wrists, shallow indentations pressed into skin by metal that had been applied with more force than the situation had ever warranted. He did not look at Parker when he lowered his hands. He did not look at Stephanie Reed. He looked at the bag on the floor near the display case, the one containing everything he had spent 8 months working toward, and he picked it up with the careful steadiness of someone choosing, in real time, not to come apart. Stephanie moved first, in the way people move when the story they constructed has just failed them publicly. Her posture shifted from certainty into something that resembled reasonableness, a performance of confusion, a recalibration that tried to reframe everything that had happened as a simple error in communication. She gestured vaguely. She adjusted her expression into something softer. The word misunderstanding surfaced in the space around her without being useful to anyone present. The boutique was not persuaded. Neither was Travis Morgan. Travis had already stepped away from the register and was standing near the service corridor with his phone at his side, his thumb moving across the screen with the practiced efficiency of someone following a procedure he had been trained for and hoped never to use. The store's incident escalation protocol existed precisely for situations the floor staff could not resolve alone. Within 90 seconds of his initiating it, the regional manager had been notified. Within 3 minutes, a message had gone directly to Malik Coleman's operations director. The calls that followed were not loud. They did not need to be. Coleman's name had already done something to the room the moment Travis said it aloud. It had not produced a physical change. No doors opened. No additional figures appeared, but it had altered the temperature of the space in a way that everyone present could feel. The staff who had remained still during the arrest moved with slightly more purpose now. The customers who had been recording quietly shifted their phones to better angles. Parker stood near the entrance with the expression of a man who had arrived confident and was now performing the slower, more uncomfortable work of reassessment. Malik Coleman had not built his reputation through visibility. He had built it through outcomes. Over the course of 12 years, his legal team had been involved in 7 civil rights cases connected to his businesses and the communities surrounding them. 4 of those cases had resulted in officer terminations. 3 had produced department-level policy changes. He did not hold press conferences. He did not seek attention for the process. He simply ensured that the process was thorough, that the documentation was airtight, and that the people who had been harmed walked away with something more durable than an apology. What no one in the boutique understood yet, what would not become fully clear until Coleman's attorneys began reviewing the footage, was that Prestige Soul operated a monitoring system that went significantly beyond standard retail security. The boutique had been targeted twice in the previous 18 months for incidents involving customer profiling. Cases where individuals had been followed by staff, or where third parties had intervened with employees to flag customers based on appearance rather than behavior. Coleman had responded by upgrading the store's internal documentation infrastructure. Every camera fed into a time-stamped incident logging system. Every flagged interaction, any unusual engagement between a customer and another party in the store's vicinity, was automatically cataloged and preserved. Stephanie Reed's behavior had registered in that system before she made the call. The footage showed her entering the boutique. It showed her locating the sneakers, examining the price, and leaving. It showed her returning to the exterior and positioning herself at a distance from Carlos that placed her within clear sight line of his shopping bag. It showed the precise moment she stepped slightly to the side, angled away from him, and raised her phone to her ear. The system had flagged the sequence as a potential third-party intervention event, the classification used for incidents where someone outside the store initiated contact with law enforcement based on observation of another customer. The log entry existed before Parker's cruiser had turned onto the block. By the time Coleman's legal team received the full file, the surveillance archive, the incident log, the 911 call recording, the transaction receipt, and Travis Morgan's written account, the evidentiary picture was not ambiguous. It was documentary. Every step of the sequence had been captured, preserved, and cross-referenced with timestamps that made the timeline irrefutable. The lawsuit was filed within the week. The charges against Stephanie Reed included filing a false police report, racial discrimination, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The charges against Officer Austin Parker included false arrest, failure to follow verification protocol, and civil rights violations. Coleman's attorneys did not pursue the cases loudly. They assembled the evidence, filed the paperwork, and allowed the documentation to speak with the patience of people who had done this before and understood that thoroughness was the only strategy that produced lasting results. The surveillance footage reached the public before the lawsuit reached the court. It circulated first through a local news outlet that had received a tip from one of the customers who had been present in the boutique. Within 48 hours, it had been picked up by national platforms. The sequence was precise and damning in the way that unedited footage tends to be. Carlos entering the store, completing the transaction, exiting with the bag. Stephanie positioning herself, making the call. Parker arriving, bypassing the staff, moving directly to Carlos without inquiry or pause. The handcuffs. The transaction log on the register screen. The name on Parker's lips when he finally chose to speak it. The comment sections did not require much interpretation. Drop one word in the comments, bias or mistake, and tell us which one you think drove Officer Parker's decision that afternoon. Then share this so others can weigh in. The courtroom proceedings moved with the methodical weight of a case that had no procedural ambiguity to exploit. The receipt was entered into evidence. The surveillance archive was entered into evidence. The 911 call recording was played in full, including the portion where Stephanie told the dispatcher that there was no way Carlos could have afforded the purchase, a statement made before she had asked him anything, before she had spoken to any store employee, and before any evidence of wrongdoing had been identified. Expert testimony confirmed that Parker had violated department protocol at 4 distinct points during the encounter, each of which represented a standard verification step that would have resolved the situation before the handcuffs were removed from his belt. The pattern Stephanie's attorneys attempted to construct, the misunderstanding, the good faith concern, the reasonable citizen acting on what she believed, collapsed against the incident log timestamp that proved her behavior had been flagged before law enforcement arrived. She had not reacted to a situation. She had initiated one. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Stephanie Reed was ordered to pay $500,000 in damages. The judgment exceeded her liquid assets by a significant margin. The legal fees that preceded it had already drawn down her savings. She listed her home within 30 days of the verdict. Her name, attached permanently to the case in every article, every legal database, every future search result connected to the boutique or to Coleman's advocacy work, became a reference point used in civil rights law seminars to illustrate the legal exposure created by racially motivated false reporting. Austin Parker's internal investigation concluded 3 weeks after the verdict. The findings documented a pattern: 7 prior complaints, 5 involving Black or Latino individuals, none resulting in disciplinary action beyond verbal review. The investigation also identified 31 stops over the previous 2 years that had produced no enforcement outcome, of which 26 involved people of color. The language of the termination notice was formal and procedural. The outcome was permanent. Parker applied to 2 adjacent departments in the following months. Both background checks returned the same result. His 12-year career had reduced itself, in every professional context that mattered, to a single documented sequence: a teenager with a receipt, a name he had not recognized, and a decision he had made before he asked a single question. What none of the parties involved in the lawsuit had known at the time of the incident, what had not become public until Coleman's Foundation released its annual program participants list 4 months later, was that Carlos Edwards had already been selected for the Coleman Youth Entrepreneurship Initiative 6 weeks before he walked into Prestige Soul. The selection had been based on academic performance, demonstrated financial discipline, and a personal statement he had submitted the previous spring. The program identified 12 young people per cycle. Carlos had ranked 3rd in the evaluation. His acceptance had been sent to his family by post, unopened on the counter at home. On the afternoon, he went to buy his sneakers. He had not yet told anyone. He had wanted to open it after the purchase, to mark the day with 2 things he had worked for simultaneously. The incident, which had been designed by circumstance and assumption to reduce him, had instead introduced him to a national audience before he had said a word. By the time the footage completed its cycle through mainstream media, the program director had already received 47 inquiries about the teenager in the video. Coleman, who had reviewed Carlos' application file independently of the case, said nothing publicly. He did not need to. The selection had been made on the merits. The incident had simply made the merits visible to people who would not otherwise have seen them. Carlos returned to Prestige Soul on a Thursday morning, 11 days after the verdict. He did not announce the visit. He came alone, wearing the same plain clothes he had worn on the day of the purchase, carrying nothing except the kind of composure that is not performed, the composure that accumulates quietly in people who have been tested without warning and have decided, in the middle of it, not to become smaller. Travis Morgan was behind the counter when he walked in. The greeting that passed between them required no elaboration. It carried the particular weight of two people who had been present for the same moment and understood, without needing to revisit it, what that moment had cost and what it had ultimately produced. The sneakers remained in their box at home. Carlos had not worn them yet. He had decided, without articulating the decision to anyone, that the first time he wore them would be to something that warranted them, a meeting, a presentation, a threshold that matched what they had come to represent. They were no longer just sneakers. They were not even primarily proof of a purchase. They were evidence of something that receipts could document but not create. The particular kind of discipline that turns months of ordinary effort into a moment of undeniable legitimacy, and the particular kind of resilience that survives being handcuffed for it. What had been intended as humiliation had become record. What had been intended to diminish had become the clearest possible demonstration of everything the accusation had tried to deny. And the truth of it, the time-stamped, documented, jurisprudentially verified truth of it, had not required Carlos Edwards to raise his voice once. It had only required him to have done exactly what he said he had done, which he had. If this story stayed with you, share it and subscribe. We're not done telling the ones that need to be told.